Thank you, students. Thank you, all the supervisors, for attending this session. It is my pleasure to be with you. I hope you are going to enjoy it. I just want to warn you in advance, this session is going to go very fast. The reason for it is in the past it was a 2-hour session and now it's been reduced to a 1-hour session. So you are going to receive the presentation. It is quite clear and you can continue from that point onwards. My email address is on the last slide. You are welcome to contact me whenever you need any assistance. Right, I hope you're ready. So the topic for today is academic writing skills. I just want to see. Yes. Now, before we continue, there is 4 keywords that I want you to take note of. What is academic writing? It is content that you present that is clear. It must be concise. It must be focused and it must be structured, and whatever you present must be backed up by evidence. Now, the characteristics of academic writing, you can see that the same content I mentioned to you on the previous slide is here again. It is planned and focused. Answer all the questions and demonstrate an understanding of the subject that you are busy researching. It must be structured, meaning that there must be a structure. Whatever you convey must form a certain pattern. Evidence, you must always be able to provide evidence of the claims that you make. Any assumptions must be backed up by evidence. It must be in a formal tone and style. Remember, you are not writing an email or a WhatsApp message to somebody. You are busy working with a research project and a research document. So it must be in a formal style and it also must have a formal tone. Now, academic writing is fundamentally a question of rather than function. Develop a sound and logical argument, checking your grammar, correctly citing your sources, sticking to a required format so that you don't end up with different arguments. Whatever you present must be clear, rigorous, and easy to understand. Now, if you look at the table on the bottom of the screen, what is academic writing? It's formal and unbiased, clean and precise, focused and well-structured, well-sourced, and correct and consistent. Then what is it not? It's not personal information that you convey, not long-winded, not emotive and grandiose. Now, before I continue with the next slide, we must remember one thing, that for the majority of us, English is not our mother tongue. It might be your second or your third language. Now, it is my second language, and very often I find writing in academic format or style quite challenging for the simple reason that it's not my mother tongue. My brain needs to think in English and not in my mother tongue. It is okay, ladies and gentlemen, to acknowledge the fact that we might struggle with English, but there's different tools that we can make use of. Make sure or ensure that you make use of whatever is available on the internet to assist you. I'll also speak to that as well. Now, if we look at styles and sentences, your writing style should be formal. I mentioned that on the previous 2 slides. We use words like do not, cannot, is not, and not, don't, cannot, or can't, and isn't. Then avoid strong adjectives, words such in huge, excellent, major. As I said, it mustn't, your language or your academic writing should not be grandiose. So use words that's easy to understand. I always say to my students, don't sugarcoat or put icing to the content. Say and present it as is. You do not, what is the right word? You are not in favor when your work gets examined and you use all of these strong adjectives. That's not what examiners look for. They look for the true message and you say it as is. Be specific, Do not soften it with words like actually and really. Words such as however, nevertheless, and although can add value to your content. Avoid also in addition, rather use furthermore or moreover. Then avoid sweeping statements. A sweeping statement is a phrase of sentence that makes a generalization. When your supervisor says that you can't generalize, this is exactly what happens. Styles and sentences, we continue. Don't be too dogmatic, strict, or rigid. Avoid overusing an item or a term. Very often, students will say brown and blue, that's references, indicates. Then they say black and red indicates. Alternate the word. Stress, indicates, mentioned. So don't overuse the same term over and over. Be careful of repetition or duplication. Sentences should not be long. I reviewed a proposal of one of my students, and I showed to her this week that she typed a one sentence paragraph. It was about 15 lines long and it consisted only of one sentence. So that is not acceptable. Always count the words of a sentence. Make sure that it's not more than 45 words to 50. That is already very long. Paragraphs must not consist of one or two sentences rather than link it to a previous or the following paragraph. Still styles and sentences, multiple authors. The rule of thumb is when you present multiple authors in your document, in the beginning you list all of the authors, and from that point onwards, you replace the second, third, and fourth authors with et al. So mention the first one, then you replace all the other authors with the Latin words et al. It replaces all the other authors except for the first one. Then always remember that you don't start a sentence with a number. Then the number must be typed in full. There's an example for you. 9 participants agreed. Then instead of using the number or the figure, you use the word in full. But in the text, you can use the figures. I'll explain to you about the figures on the next or second slide from here on. Shorter sentences make it easier for us to understand your work. Remove cluttered words that don't add to your meaning. Then always remember to number your subheadings. There is examples for you. Now, the style of a paragraph must always start with a lead sentence. That must tell the reader what they can expect in that particular paragraph. Then you present an argument by using the pattern, assertion, evidence, and agreement or affirmation discussion. Mention contradictory beliefs and counter arguments. If everything is positive, examiners do not find it credible. Formals or font styles. We use formal styles like Arial or Times New Roman. Look at the requirements of the department where you study. My students must use Arial font as a rule of thumb. I just find it easier to read. So Arial and Times New Roman, they are formal fonts and used throughout the academic environment. The content on this slide, I will explain to you quickly. So for example, you type a sentence and then you reread the sentence. Then you discovered, no, there's certain content that I want to move to another place in the sentence. What I always tell my students, you highlight the content that you want to move. Instead of cut and paste it, use copy and paste. Then you read the sentence again to make sure it makes sense. Thereafter, if you are happy, remove then the content at the end of the sentence that you copied for the simple reason that if we copy and paste, we sometimes forget where we got it from, and then sometimes the undo button does not work. So then you know exactly where you got it from. This is just a nice to know and a nice to have. Still styles and sentences. It's always important that you read your content and reread again. Does the new content that you want to include, does it fit the content? Make sure that it's not a duplication. Make sure that there's an easy flow of the content that you can understand and somebody else can understand that. Section or structure, sections and paragraphs. I mentioned to you, avoid long sentences, long paragraphs, and pages that consist of the same information over and over again. If you look at the numbering of the sub-paragraph, I want you to have a look that, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there is a full stop after the last number. That is not acceptable. The last number must not end with a full stop. I'll explain to you in another slide that as well. Then sometimes we prefer not to include the fourth level headings in the table of content, but again, consult your supervisor and the guidelines of the department where you are registered in. I mentioned to you that sometimes we stick to the third level. I'll also show on the next slide to you what types of font and bold or italics or underline, whatever the case may be, how you should present that. Also, you are going to receive the presentation. Make use of this while you are busy with your research. We sometimes forget about what you learned today. So the presentation contains a lot of information that you can always refer back to. Then when you have different points in a paragraph, it is more preferable to put that in a bulleted list instead of having all in sentences. Then if you, for example, have a sentence and you say, this is different colors that we find in life. Blue, comma, red, comma, black, comma, and green. Before you type and, you end it, the previous section with a comma, and then the last construct, you say and green. I hope it makes sense. You can also use semicolons to divide the points. As I mentioned, bullets are very handy. Now, this is example I said to you on the previous slide. The main heading is in bold and caps. The main heading's number, like 1 point, end with a point. Subheading 1.1, 1.1.1, and then the subheading does not have a full stop after the last number. The subheading must be in lowercase and bold. The subheading, lowercase, bold, and italics. And then the subheading must be in normal text, only italics and not bold. Headers, tables, and figures. It must be concise and to the point. Remember, your headers will be in your table of content. It must not consist of sentences, only short and to the point headers. Be consistent in style. When you, in your proposal, write contents with figures and tables, number it table 1, table 2 and table 3, or figure 1, figure 2 and figure 3. But when you are busy with your actual research, after you pass the proposal module, then you use the chapter number. So table 5.1 and 5.2 figure is in chapter 5, and then figure 2.1 and figure 2.2 can be found in chapter 2. Still tables and figures. It is used to present data. We always use left alignment. We don't center the information. Figures present visualizations. As examiners, we enjoy pictures and figures to make sure that we understand the content. Is sometimes easier, especially if you are busy with data analysis. Always announce the table or the figure before you pronounce it in the sentence or in the paragraph. And position of labels. Table headings must appear on top of the or just above the table. Figure labels below the figures. There is an example of a table and figure on the next page. You can see that table 1.1 is above the table. There is your table, and then the source, in this case, its own compilation. There is an example of a figure. Look in the preceding paragraph or sentence. You indicate the figure, you say figure 1.1 below illustrates, and then the rest. The source in this case is Stats SA. There is another example for you of a figure that is presented. Below the figure is the name or the title of the figure, as well as the source, and then you explain the content below that. Consistency and styles. When you present bullets, don't use different types of bullets in the proposal or in your document. Use the same style throughout. Consistency of the first person, we and I, or the third person, the researchers surveyed. I advise my students to use the third person, but again, it's up to you and your supervisor. There's an example for you in a publication. It is important to understand the workplace of your participant. Rather say it's important to understand the participant's workplace. Spellings and terms. We don't use the American style of writing content. It's not color without the U, it's color with a U, not organizations with a Z, but organizations with an S. Tenses. Discussion points from the literature is in present tense. There is an example for you. However, events that previously occurred and are reported in literature should be in the past tense. Again, I have an example for you here. Use past tense when discussing your own research. That is, for example, in the chapter where you do your data analysis, and the final chapter where you use your recommendations and conclusions. Be consistent with the tenses in your proposal as well as your document. Then there is just other examples for you. I agree, you agree, he or she agrees, they agree. There's other examples for you. Due to the limited time available, I'm not going to read all of these to you. Please go through this on your own time. Hyphens. Again, your language editor will assist you there. But if you use, for example, problem solving, decision making above mentioned with hyphens, use it throughout the document. When two words together form a noun, a hyphen is not required. Chapter introductions and conclusions. Start each chapter or sections with introduction. Provide an overview. Explain the role of the chapter. Then my students must present me with a mind map so that we know exactly what will be discussed in a specific chapter. Mind maps are really handy to use. Then mention each subsection before you present that, so that the reader know exactly what they can expect in the following section. Similarly, end a chapter or a section with a conclusion. That is at the end of your proposal or the end of each chapter of your dissertation or thesis. Provide a summary of what was covered to remind the reader. Explain the role of the chapter. Discussions should occur in a discussion section before the conclusions. It is not usual to introduce new content in the conclusion. Referencing and citations. Just the date in parentheses, that means it's part of a sentence. In this case, it's Becker and Smith in 2005 found the following. When you are in this a sentence, it depends on if you are using APA or Harvard referencing method. Becker and Smith in 2017 is in a sentence, or Becker ampersand Smith in 2017, that is also included in a sentence or at the back of the sentence. This last example on this slide, it's where the citations or the references is presented, the sources at the end of a sentence or a paragraph. There is 2 examples for you depending on the style. Now, for PhD, cite only original sources as references. For master's degrees, you can cite secondary references. Hollard 2005 as cited by Klein 2019. I explained to you the different examples or where you put the reference in the middle of a sentence or where you found that. Now, in this case, at the beginning of the sentence, Neverend and Nguni in 2019 said that information. Then in the next sentence, you want to refer to those authors again. You don't have to include the date again because it's in the same paragraph. Then avoid multiple consecutive references to the same source. My students must include page numbers in their references for the simple reason, if we publish from the study, some journals want to include the page numbers so that we have it. Again, it's between you and your supervisor. Just confirm what he or she wants. There is just other examples. You only use the ampersand when it's in or between parentheses. In the text, you don't use the sign or the ampersand in the middle of a sentence. Use current sources more or less between the years 2018 to 2023. If your supervisor indicate to you that your references are too old, that is one of the reasons. When you use Google Scholar, put in the time frame that you want the articles in the custom range option. Then there is just nice to have verbs for you, descriptive, analytical, and evaluative verbs. You can refer back to that. Acronyms, the rule of thumb is if you present an acronym for the first time in your document, type it out in words and in brackets the acronym, and from that point onwards you can only use the acronym. Writing numbers, I mentioned to you, from number 1 to 9 use words, from 10 and onwards use figures. For percentage, you can either use the percentage sign or the word percent in full. Participants and gender, it's better to say they and their instead of he or she. We get different gender groups. It is not acceptable to say he and she. Rather use they. There is examples of verbs for you. For example, neutral verbs. The author says, the author notes and believes. Then there is stronger verbs. The author agrees, rejects, or argues. And inference verbs imply, suggests, and thinks. So refer back to this so that you don't use the same verbs over and over. Okay, literature studies. Integrate various sources in your literature study. that is important. Avoid a series of paragraphs devoted to only one author. Still literature studies. It's important in a literature review to refer to not only one definition. You include different definitions, and especially in PhD studies, then you mention with which definition your study goes, and you can also join two different definitions. Still literature, a section called discussion can address various approaches. In some research, literature studies provide some sort of data such as cases. Information from literature is called secondary data, whereas information that you gather from your own measuring tool is referred to as primary data. Very important, the golden thread. From the beginning to the last word of your dissertation or thesis must form or follow a golden thread. It means that it's not different content. You must write through the document and maintain a golden thread from one construct to the other. At the end of the day, it makes one. Submit a section of your proposal to your supervisor. You are going to get feedback that you don't like. Remember, it's constructive feedback, and that helps you to improve on what you are busy with. Always spell check your work before you submit it. If I, for example, receive content from a student to review and I reach 5 language errors, I send it back to the student to rectify. It's not my job as a supervisor to fix spelling errors. Right, as I mentioned, when students submit content to me and I find a lot of incorrect content, I send it back to them to fix it before I continue with the review. Language editing is very expensive. Know beforehand that you will have to budget for language editors. I always send my articles and my work to a language editor because, as I mentioned to you, it's not my mother tongue. Tips for checking your content: reread a document a few days after completing it to make sure that it makes sense. Eliminate errors. Check your language. There is a program, Grammarly. You can download it for free, but it just provides you with basic information. If you want to have more advanced options, you need to subscribe to that. What is always very nice is sometimes on Black Friday in November, you can get this subscription for much cheaper. So you can have a look at that as well. Make sure that the content where you present it fits nicely. Otherwise, see where else you can fit it. If you address similar issues in subsections, make sure that you rather combine them. Is there a link and a relationship between sentences, and is it clear? Same terminology, and make sure that you use that consistently. Tips for checking: how is the sequence? Can the sequence be improved of the content that you presented? If you are making a point, does it fit in and support your argumentation? I mentioned to you a lead sentence earlier in the presentation. Does your paragraph start with a lead sentence? If you reread it, make sure that it fits well. In a paragraph, always start with a punchline because that will indicate to the reader what they can expect. Reread a sentence, make sure that it's logical and in a logical order. Scientific writing should be factful and adhere to the research study. Findings should be reported objectively. It should not contain generalizations, inaccurate statements, allegations, or sweeping statements. Avoid any exaggerated remarks. For example, research from the project should be used to revolutionize. You can see here that they again use all this huge words. Like I say about the icing of the cake, we say whatever is down to the point. Don't use slang, vulgar or popular use of language. Keep it short and concise. I said to you, shorter sentences that provides the information is more preferable than long sentences. And then at a postgraduate level, students are expected to formulate viewpoints academically and scientifically. That differs from writing an essay or a letter. Long research or business report is not an indication of academic excellence. It should be well structured, academic, and well formulated. Never try to pad your research script or scientific article with extra information. Just get to the point. The right length is related to the integration of sources and the ability of the student to master the studied literature. Integration. Integrate theory and theory with research results meaningfully. Secondary knowledge should be integrated before the researcher can add new or primary knowledge. Always ask yourself, does whatever you try to convey fit in with a body of knowledge and the specific field that you are researching in? The researcher must first contextualize current research by giving theoretical background in which the current research falls. The essence of this part of academic writing style is to integrate secondary research on the specific topic. Then viewpoints that you can look at, is it integrated, assessed, analyzed, synthesized, or compiled? I'm going to quickly go over this. You can please refer back to this slide and the next slide when we are done with the presentation. The first example is where you use multiple authors that you cite from Van Antwerpen in 2017 and Bruins in 2018 identified 2 fields of surveys. Dube in 2020 found another example. So integrate and consult different authors. Compare the viewpoints of different authors with one another. 2 authors different from each other. Use this as a point of discussion to form your own point of view on this. Compare the viewpoints of different authors with one another. The example, both brown and green found something. In contrast, black found something else. This, especially on PhD level, is very important. This section here, just again, explain to you what I did in the previous slides regarding citations. You can refer to this in your own time. Systematic or systemic presentation by means of meaningful headings. Framework and content of research articles should be presented systematically and logically. Incoherent units and subunits can be done by means of meaningful headings. You never can have enough headings for different sections. Headings are not merely the names for sections. It must present exactly what you can expect in the next or following section. Additional guidance, meaningful headings, division by means of headings. The study must be structured meaningfully in different subheadings according to the theme, aims or goals, objectives, hypotheses, or research questions. The title consists of certain concepts or constructs or building blocks which have appearing on the research question and problem. In conceptualization of the study within the particular theoretical framework of the research, the major constructs, the concepts and constructs should be explained. Normally, the subsection is dedicated to each of the constructs. Be comprehensive and use recent and applicable information. To be comprehensive is to discuss and justify the most important facts, theories, and models. Conclusions prove your insight. Conclusions arise from your research. Use this opportunity to show your academic mettle. Draw your own query and logical conclusions and formulate them in your own words based on the factual findings and theoretical foundations. Do not add new information to the conclusion. I mentioned that other words. Refer back to the theory. Be accurate. You can remember that I mentioned this on the first slide or the second slide where I had 4 little blocks was then said that it must be backed up by evidence. Okay, be accurate. As a researcher, the student and at postgraduate level should be a scientist in the true sense of the word. Academic or scientific research should be meticulous. Apply this principle throughout. 10 tips on improving academic writing. Write to the level of the intended audience, build on the past, get to the point, take a stand, provide supporting evidence, inform the audience, avoid literally cliches, show a little style, edit, and re-edit your work. Proofread leads to perfect results. I mentioned to you about Grammarly. In conclusion, a world where people are constantly writing on informal platforms such as emails, for example, or reports, social media, it's very normal for young academics to feel hesitant as to whether they are striking the proper tone in formal writing. Ultimately, it's only through experimentation and practice that you will find the form that best suit your work. Right, there's references for you. There is very helpful videos. I looked at all of them myself and I can propose that to you and for you to look at videos to help you. And in conclusion, I mentioned to you about the golden thread. Remember, from your first word to your last word must form a golden thread. Right, that is my story. I know I went through it very fast, but as I said to you, you can refer to this in your own spare time. Also look at the videos that can help you a great deal. And also remember that academic writing is a skill. It's not easy in the beginning, but it's a skill for you to learn.